The night unfolded quietly at first, like so many others, with no hint of the storm it would become. I was perched on a stool in the dim glow of my apartment's tiny kitchen, swirling a glass of red wine, when my phone buzzed against the counter. The sharp sound jolted me and I glanced at the screen. A text from Mark. "Stuck at the warehouse again. Inventory's a mess. Home tomorrow." My fingers tightened around the glass as a familiar ache bloomed in my chest, half comfort, half fury. Another excuse, another lie. I'd grown numb to them over the years, each one a thin thread unraveling what little was left of us. Mark wasn't mine anymore. His heart, his time, his everything belonged elsewhere, and I was just a shadow lingering in the ruins of our life together. I set the glass down hard, the clink echoing in the stillness. The air felt heavy, pressing against my lungs. I couldn't stay here. Not in this kitchen, not in this apartment, not in this hollow existence. Catching my reflection in the window, I paused. At 41, I still turned heads. Long legs, a cascade of dark auburn hair, a figure that hadn't surrendered to time. Yet Mark's gaze had drifted away, leaving me to wonder what I'd lost. A burst of noise from the living room broke my spiral. It was Ethan, my stepbrother, and his friend Jace, their voices rising over the hum of a video game. They'd been crashing here more often lately, ever since Ethan started helping Jace with odd jobs at the garage down the street. Jace was a whirlwind, rough around the edges, with calloused hands and a grin that carried a spark of danger. He worked part-time fixing cars, his broad frame and easy confidence drawing eyes wherever he went. I'd noticed it too, though I'd never admit it out loud. Tonight they were sprawled across the furniture. Ethan slouched in the armchair, Jace stretched out on the couch, both lost in their virtual battle. For a moment I stood in the doorway, watching. Jace's laugh rumbled low, his tanned arms flexing as he leaned into the game. He was younger than me, sure, but there was a solidity to him, a presence that lingered. "I'm heading out," I said, my voice cutting through their noise. Ethan barely glanced up, his brow furrowing. "Now? It's late." I shrugged, grabbing my jacket. "Yeah, now." Jace's eyes flicked toward me, quick and curious, but I turned away before it could settle. Something restless stirred in me, a hunger I hadn't fed in years. I slipped out the door, the cool night air hitting my skin as I climbed into my car. The engine roared to life, and I drove toward the city's pulse, the skyline glowing faintly ahead. I didn't know where I was going, just that I needed to move, to escape, to feel something. The bar I found was tucked into a narrow street, its neon sign flickering. Inside, the murmur of voices mingled with soft jazz, the dim lights casting long shadows. I slid onto a stool at the counter and ordered a drink, something stronger than wine. The first sip burned, then settled, loosening the knot in my chest. For once, I wasn't Mark's wife, Ethan's stepsister, or anyone's anchor. I was just here, dissolving into the crowd. Men noticed me, of course they did. A guy in a sharp suit leaned in, flashing a smile. "Here alone?" he asked, smooth as polished glass. I met his eyes, then turned away. He was handsome, but he didn't stir me. Another tried, then another, all of them blurring into the same empty noise. I wasn't looking for them. Hours slipped by, the alcohol softening the edges of my thoughts. When I finally stepped outside, the night had deepened, a brisk wind tugging at my hair. I reached my car, slid the key into the ignition, and nothing. The engine sputtered, then died. I tried again. Dead. Frustration flared as I fumbled for my phone and dialed Ethan. "Car's busted," I said, keeping it short. His voice was groggy. "Seriously? Where are you?" I sent him my location. "Can you get me?" There was a shuffle, then Jace's voice cut through, steady and awake. "I'll handle it, Ethan. Go back to sleep." My breath caught, but I swallowed it down. Jace was coming. I leaned back in the driver's seat, the silence wrapping around me, and waited. The headlights sliced through the dark, carving a path down the empty street. I watched them grow closer, my pulse ticking up despite the haze of liquor dulling my edges. Jace's truck rolled to a stop beside my lifeless car, and he stepped out, his silhouette sharp against the glow. He tapped on my window and I rolled it down, the night air slipping in with him. He leaned in slightly, one eyebrow arching as he took me in. "Didn't expect to see you like this," he said, his voice carrying a tease wrapped in something softer. I was tipsy, more than tipsy, and his tone pulled a laugh from me, loose and unguarded. "What, stranded or drunk?" I shot back, tilting my head. He grinned, a flicker of something warm in his eyes. "Both, maybe. It's a good look, though." He straightened, circling to the hood of my car. I stumbled out after him, steadying myself against the door as he popped it open. "Battery's loose," he said after a minute, his hands deft as he tugged at the cables. "Probably some kids messing around. That's why it wouldn't start." I frowned, swaying slightly. "And your truck? You drove here?" He shrugged, wiping his hands on his jeans. "It's fine where it is. You're in no shape to be out here alone. I'll grab it tomorrow." His practicality shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. Jace, reckless Jace, playing the responsible one. It twisted something in me, a flicker I didn't want to name. We climbed into his truck, the cab warm and smelling faintly of motor oil and leather. The silence stretched as he drove, the city lights smearing past in a blur. I stole a glance at him. His strong jaw, the faint stubble catching the glow, his hands steady on the wheel. Finally, I broke the quiet. "Were you staying over tonight? Did I wreck your plans?" He kept his eyes on the road, but a small smile tugged at his mouth. "Nah, couldn't sleep anyway. Seeing you actually made it better." His words landed soft, like they weren't meant to mean much, but they did. They settled into me, stirring the restless thing I'd been carrying all night. When we pulled up to the apartment, he killed the engine and turned to me. "Coffee?" he asked, his voice low. I was exhausted, my limbs heavy, but the offer warmed me in a way I hadn't expected. "Yeah," I murmured. "That'd be nice." Inside, the kitchen was still dim, the wine glass sitting abandoned on the counter. Jace moved with ease, filling the pot while I leaned against the wall, watching him. He glanced over his shoulder. "Lara, why do you look so lost?" The question pierced the quiet, simple but loaded. I blinked, caught off guard by the sincerity in his eyes. He wasn't just asking to fill the space, he wanted to know. I sighed, the alcohol loosening my tongue. "I don't know, Jace. Or maybe I do, and I just don't want to say it." He set a mug down, crossing his arms as he leaned against the counter, waiting. His patience undid me. "It's everything," I admitted, my voice cracking. "It piles up, years of it, and tonight it just spilled over." He nodded, like he understood more than I'd said. "Mark?" he asked, quiet but direct. I laughed, sharp and bitter. "Yeah, Mark. He's gone. Has been for a long time. Not here, not with me. I'm just floating in what's left." Saying it out loud felt like shedding a weight I'd carried too long. Jace didn't flinch, just held my gaze. "Is that why you went out? To run from it?" I looked away, tracing the edge of the counter with my finger. "Maybe. Or maybe I wanted to disappear for a while, be someone else." He was quiet for a beat, then said, "If you're trying to disappear, maybe what you need is someone to see you." His words hung there, gentle but piercing, and something inside me unraveled. I pushed off the wall, meaning to stand straighter, but the room tilted. Jace caught my arm, steady and warm, just as the living room door creaked open. Ethan shuffled in, bleary-eyed, his hair a mess. "You're back," he mumbled, then squinted at me. "Lara, you good?" I forced a smile. "Fine, just a little buzzed." He glanced at Jace, skeptical, but Jace waved it off. "She's okay, man, I got her home. She'll sleep it off." Ethan yawned, nodding. "Cool. Thanks, Jace. Night." He shuffled off, and I heard his door click shut. Jace turned back to me, his voice dropping. "Need help to your room?" I tried to stand again, but the floor betrayed me. I stumbled into him, and his coffee mug tipped, splashing dark liquid across his shirt. "Shit," he muttered, pulling at the wet fabric. I froze, my eyes catching on the way it clung to him, outlining the hard lines beneath. I should have looked away. I didn't. Jace cursed under his breath, tugging at the soaked shirt as the coffee seeped into the fabric. I stood there, rooted, my gaze locked on the way it molded to his chest, tracing the taut lines of muscle beneath. The air thickened, my pulse loud in my ears. "Guess I need a new one," he said, a half-smile tugging at his lips as he caught me staring. I swallowed, my throat dry despite the liquor still humming through me. "Yeah," I managed. "There's something in Mark's closet. Ethan's room's locked, as usual." A faint laugh slipped out, more nervous than I meant it to be. Jace nodded, steadying me with a hand as we moved toward the bedroom. The hallway felt too short, his touch too present against my back, a light pressure that sent heat curling through me. I flicked on the bedroom light, the soft glow spilling over the space Mark and I had once shared. It felt like a stranger's room now, cold and distant. I opened the closet, pulling out a plain gray tee. "This'll work," I said, handing it to him, my voice barely above a whisper. He took it, his fingers brushing mine, and the room shrank around us. He stepped closer, not much, just enough, and his eyes found mine, holding them with an intensity that made my breath hitch. The distance between us was a thread, fragile and taut. "Lara," he said, low and rough, like my name was a question he hadn't meant to ask. That voice, it broke something loose inside me, a wall I'd built over years of silence with Mark. I hadn't heard anyone say my name like that in so long, hadn't felt seen like this. My chest tightened, a storm of want and fear colliding. Jace hesitated, his gaze dropping for a split second before snapping back to me. "It's nothing," he muttered, shaking his head as he started to peel off the wet shirt. But I couldn't let it go, not the feeling, not the moment. "Wait," I said, my voice soft but firm, cutting through the quiet. He froze, the shirt half off, pressed against his chest. His eyes searched mine, a flicker of confusion there. "Why?" he asked, the word edged with something unsteady. I stepped closer, the alcohol fueling me past the fear, past the chains I'd worn too long. "Tonight, at the bar," I started, holding his gaze. "Guys tried to talk to me, good-looking, smooth, the kind Mark would have hated. They all wanted something." Jace's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak, just watched me. I took a shaky breath. "None of them got to me, not like you do." The words landed heavy, the silence swallowing them whole. His breath quickened, his eyes darting away then back, battling something I couldn't see. "Tell me why," I pressed, stepping closer still, the space between us electric. He opened his mouth, closed it, then finally spoke, his voice low and raw. "Because you've always been different to me, Lara, right from the start." Something snapped then, not just in me but between us. I could feel his breath now, warm against my skin, and my hands itched to move, to touch, but I didn't know where to start. Jace's hand lifted, hovering near my cheek, then settling there, his touch light but searing. "We shouldn't," he said, but it sounded hollow, like he didn't believe it. I closed my eyes, leaning into his palm. "But you want to," I whispered, and that was it. The dam broke. He let go, all the hesitation crumbling as he leaned in, his lips brushing mine. It was tentative at first, careful, testing. But when I didn't pull back, it deepened, his hands sliding to my waist, pulling me against him. My fingers pressed into his chest, feeling the thud of his heart under warm skin. It was wrong. Every reason screamed it. But it felt like the truest thing I'd known in years. We kissed until the air ran thin, a desperate edge to it, like we'd been starving for this. His breath lingered on my lips as he pulled back, his eyes locked on mine, wide and searching. "Ethan," he murmured, a thread of worry cutting through the haze. I smiled, steady despite my racing pulse. "He's in his room. Door's locked. We'd hear it." He nodded, but another thought flickered across his face. "Mark?" I shook my head, a quiet confidence settling in. "He's not coming back tonight. The words freed something in me, a lightness I hadn't felt in ages. Jace stared at me, the last of his doubt melting away, replaced by something unguarded, something hungry. "We can lock it too," I said, my voice a quiet dare. His eyes darkened, his breath hitching as he reached for the door. The click of the lock echoed, sharp and final, sealing us in. When he turned back, his gaze caught on my jacket, now crumpled on the floor. His brow lifted, and he looked up to find me perched on the edge of the bed, watching him. His breath faltered, his eyes tracing over me, torn between restraint and surrender. "What are you gonna do, Jace?" I asked, deliberate and low. He didn't answer, not with words. He just moved, slow and sure, toward me. Jace crossed the room in steady strides, his eyes never leaving mine. The air crackled, thick with everything we weren't saying. He stopped at the edge of the bed, his knees brushing the mattress as he leaned in, close enough that I could feel the heat rolling off him. His gaze was a storm, hesitation warring with something raw and unguarded. Then, in a voice so low it vibrated through me, he said, "You're the most incredible thing I've ever seen, Lara." The words hit like a spark, igniting a warmth that spread deep into my chest, carving out a space I'd forgotten existed. I wanted to reply, to say something clever or bold, but my throat locked, words trapped behind the rush of feeling. He leaned closer, his breath brushing my skin, and time seemed to stall. My hands moved before I could think, sliding up his arms, feeling the strength beneath his warmth. I was drunk, not just on the liquor still buzzing in my veins, but on this, on him. My senses blurred, softened by the haze, but my heart was wide awake, pounding with a clarity I couldn't ignore. His lips found mine again, hungrier this time, and I melted into it, my fingers digging into his shoulders. It was better than I'd imagined, better than anything I'd had before. Maybe it was the alcohol, maybe it was Jace, maybe it was the way his solid frame pressed against me, but it consumed me. His hands roamed, firm but careful, mapping me like he was memorizing every curve. I arched into him, a sound slipping out, loud, unfiltered, despite the fog in my head. His breath hitched, a flicker of tension crossing his face. I clamped a hand over my mouth, muffling myself, suddenly aware of the locked doors, the quiet beyond them. "Don't be scared," I whispered, my voice unsteady but sure. "Don't stop." His eyes fluttered shut, a shudder running through him as his grip tightened. Then he let go, completely. I felt it in the way he moved, the way his body answered mine, a rhythm building between us that drowned out everything else. It went on, endless and electric, my body reacting in ways I hadn't thought possible through the haze of liquor. At one point, a wave crashed through me, sharp and wild, and I bit down on my lip to keep quiet. Jace's hands clenched, his own release following, his breath ragged against my neck. When it was over, he collapsed beside me, the mattress dipping under his weight. We lay there, tangled in the aftermath, our breathing slowing in sync. "That was—" he started, then trailed off, a faint laugh escaping him. "Beautiful," I finished, my voice soft but certain. He turned his head, meeting my eyes, and nodded. Exhaustion tugged at us both, and as we talked, quiet murmurs about nothing and everything, sleep crept in, pulling us under. The night blurred into stillness, a cocoon of dark and quiet. I stirred sometime later, the room faintly lit by the streetlight seeping through the blinds. Jace was at the edge of the bed, pulling the gray tea from the floor. His movements were careful, deliberate, like he was trying not to wake me. I watched silently as he hesitated, glancing toward the door. I could almost hear his thoughts. Ethan down the hall, Mark's shadow somewhere out there. It made sense, this caution, but it wasn't just about logic anymore. Not for me. Not for us. "Jace," I whispered, my voice cutting through the hush. He paused, his back to me, the shirt still in his hands. I sat up slightly, the sheets rustling. This wasn't just the alcohol. He didn't turn, but I saw his shoulders tense, then relax. "I mean it," I said, letting the truth settle in my words. I'm looking forward to what's next. Wait for me." He stayed still for a moment, then gave a small nod. Not agreement, not rejection, just acknowledgement. The door opened silently and he slipped out, the soft click of it closing behind him ringing in my ears. I sank back into the pillows, a strange peace settling over me. This wasn't the end. It was the start. The apartment was quiet again, the night stretching on beyond the walls. I closed my eyes, replaying it all. The bar, the breakdown, Jace's hands, his voice. It should have felt wrong, a betrayal of everything I'd built with Mark, but it didn't. It felt like waking up. My phone buzzed on the nightstand and I ignored it, knowing it'd be another lie from Mark, another thread snapping. I didn't need it anymore. Whatever came next, I'd face it. Sober, steady, and with Jace's shadow lingering in the corners of my mind. Here's part 5 of the story, continuing the narrative with the same emotional resonance, plot development, and style. It's approximately 5,000 characters long. Let me know if you approve after reading. Part 5. Morning crept in slow, the first threads of light slipping through the blinds and pooling on the floor. I lay there, the sheets cool against my skin, the memory of Jace's warmth still clinging to me like a second pulse. My head throbbed faintly. Not a full hangover, just the echo of last night's recklessness. But I felt alive, raw in a way I hadn't in years. The quiet was heavy, broken only by the distant hum of the city waking up outside. I reached for my phone, the screen lighting up with Mark's text from hours ago. "Inventory's done. Be home soon." No apology, no warmth, just words. I let it fall back onto the nightstand, untouched. The apartment felt different now, like it held a secret in its walls. I slid out of bed, my bare feet brushing the hardwood as I moved to the mirror. My hair was a tangle, my eyes bright despite the shadows beneath them. I looked like myself, maybe more than I had in a long time. The woman staring back didn't belong to Mark's excuses or Ethan's indifference. She was mine. I pulled on a robe, the fabric soft against my skin, and stepped into the hallway. Ethan's door was still shut, the faint sound of his snoring seeping through. Jace was gone, his truck no longer parked outside when I glanced through the window. The kitchen greeted me with last night's ghosts, the wine glass, the coffee mug Jace had used now sitting empty on the counter. I traced its rim with my finger, replaying his voice, his touch. "You're the most incredible thing I've ever seen." My chest tightened, a mix of ache and thrill. I'd meant what I'd said. This wasn't just the alcohol. It was him, us, something real breaking through the numbness. The kettle hissed as I set it to boil, the routine grounding me even as my thoughts spun. What now? Mark would walk through that door soon, oblivious, and Ethan would wake up none the wiser. But I wasn't the same. Footsteps shuffled behind me, and I turned to see Ethan stumbling in, rubbing his eyes. "Morning," he mumbled, heading straight for the fridge. "You okay after last night?" I nodded, pouring hot water into a mug. "Yeah, just needed to blow off steam. Jace got me home." He grunted, pulling out a carton of juice. "Good. He's solid like that." He didn't linger, didn't ask more, just shuffled back to his room with the juice in hand. I watched him go, the door clicking shut again. Solid. Jace was more than that. Dangerous, steady, a pull I couldn't shake. I sipped my tea, the warmth spreading through me, and let my mind drift. Mark's return loomed like a shadow, but it didn't scare me anymore. I'd spent years waiting for him to see me, to come back to what we'd had. But last night had shifted something permanent. Jace had seen me, really seen me, and I wasn't letting that go. My phone buzzed again and I glanced at it. Another text from Mark. "On my way." I set it down, unbothered. Let him come. I'd face him with this new fire in my veins, and he'd never know what hit him. The day stretched out, slow and restless. I cleaned the kitchen, the motions automatic, but my thoughts kept circling back to Jace. Where was he now? At the garage, elbows deep in an engine? Or thinking about me the way I was thinking about him? I wanted to call, to hear his voice, but I held back. Not yet. This was too fresh, too fragile to rush. The lock clicked in the front door mid-afternoon and Mark stepped in, his shoulders slumped, his face tired but distant. "Hey," he said, dropping his bag by the couch. "Hey," I replied, my voice even, my eyes steady on him. He didn't notice the difference, not the sharpness in my gaze, not the way I stood taller. "Rough night at the warehouse," he said, more to the air than to me, heading for the fridge. I watched him, feeling the weight of his absence in a new light. "Sure," I said, letting the word hang. He didn't catch the edge, just grabbed a beer and sank onto the couch. I turned away, my lips curving into a faint smile he'd never see. He could have his beer, his lies, his separate world. I had something else now, something he couldn't touch. The day dragged on, Mark drifting through it like a ghost, while I waited for the moment I could slip away again, back to the edge of whatever Jace and I had started. By evening, Ethan emerged again, muttering about meeting Jace at the garage. "You good here?" he asked, grabbing his keys. "Yeah," I said, casual, though my pulse jumped at Jace's name. "Tell him thanks again for last night." Ethan nodded, oblivious, and left. Alone again, I stood in the quiet, the apartment settling around me. Mark was in the bedroom now, probably asleep already, and I felt the pull, sharp, insistent, to find Jace. Not tonight, not yet, but soon. I'd told him to wait for me, and I meant it. Whatever this was, it wasn't done. The evening settled over the apartment like a heavy blanket, the kind that smothers more than it warms. Mark was sprawled on the bed, his breathing slow and even, lost to sleep or indifference. I didn't care which. I stood in the doorway, watching him for a moment. A man I'd once loved, now reduced to a stranger sharing my space. The room smelled faintly of his cologne, a scent that used to pull me in but now just hung there, stale and irrelevant. I turned away, closing the door softly behind me, and moved to the living room. The couch still held the imprint of Jace's frame from last night, and I sank into it, letting the memory wrap around me. My phone sat silent on the coffee table, tempting me. I could text Jace, ask where he was, what he was thinking, but I didn't. Not because I was afraid, though part of me was, but because I wanted the next move to mean something, to carry the weight of what we'd started. I leaned back, closing my eyes, and let the night replay itself. His hands, his voice, the way he'd looked at me like I was the only thing in the room. It wasn't just a fling, a drunken mistake. It was a crack in the wall I'd built, letting light spill through, and I wasn't ready to seal it shut. The next morning, Mark was gone again. Some mumbled excuse about an early shift, his bag vanishing with him. I didn't ask questions, didn't care to hear the lies. Ethan stumbled out later, bleary-eyed and muttering about the garage. "Jace says your car's fixed," he said, pouring coffee. "He tightened the battery. Should be fine now." My heart skipped, but I kept my face neutral. "Good to know. Thanks." He shrugged, sipping his drink. "He's there all day if you want to pick it up." He didn't see the way my fingers tightened around my mug, the sudden rush of possibility flooding me. I showered, the hot water washing away the last of the fog, and dressed with more care than I'd admit. Jeans that hugged my legs, a sweater that skimmed my curves, my hair loose and dark against my shoulders. The drive to the garage was short, the city humming around me, but my thoughts were louder. When I pulled up, Jace was there, leaning over a rusted sedan, his sleeves rolled up, grease streaking his forearms. He straightened as I stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag, his eyes finding mine across the lot. "Hey," he said, simple but loaded, and I felt it. The pull, the thread between us tightening. "Hey," I echoed, walking closer. "Ethan said my car's ready." He nodded, tossing the rag onto a workbench. "Yeah, just a quick fix. You're good now." His voice was steady, but his gaze lingered, searching. I stepped into the shade of the garage, the air cooler, the smell of oil and metal sharp around us. "Thanks for last night," I said, keeping it light, testing the waters. "Getting me home, I mean." His mouth twitched, a half smile breaking through. "Anytime. Looked like you needed it. There it was. His ease, his way of cutting through the noise without pushing too hard. We stood there, the space between us humming, neither of us moving to close it. "You okay today?" he asked, quieter now, like he was peeling back a layer. I nodded, leaning against a toolbox. "Better than I've been in a while?" It was true, and he seemed to hear it, his eyes softening. "Good," he said, then hesitated, glancing at the car he'd been working on. "You sticking around, or?" He left it open, an invitation wrapped in caution. I smiled, small but real. "Maybe for a bit. Got nowhere else to be." His grin widened and he jerked his head toward the sedan. "Keep me company then. This one's a mess." I stayed, perched on a stool as he worked, the clank of tools filling the silence. We talked. Easy stuff at first, cars and weather, then deeper about the city, the lives we'd stumbled through. He didn't ask about Mark, and I didn't bring him up. It was just us, the garage a bubble holding the world at bay. Hours slipped by, the sun dipping lower, and I felt it building. Something steady, something I could trust. When he finished wiping his hands again, he looked at me, direct and unguarded. "You hungry? There's a diner down the street." My pulse jumped, but I nodded. "Yeah, let's go." The diner was small, all chipped formica and flickering lights, but it felt right. We slid into a booth, coffee steaming between us, and the conversation flowed, laughs, stories, the kind of ease I'd forgotten I could have. His knee brushed mine under the table, accidental but electric, and neither of us pulled away. By the time we left, the sky was dark, the air cool against my skin. He walked me to my car, his hands in his pockets, his eyes on me. "See you soon?" he asked, a question and a promise. "Yeah," I said, meaning it. "Soon." I drove home, the night alive around me, Jace's presence a quiet fire I carried with me. The days that followed hummed with a new rhythm, a quiet thrill threading through the mundane. Mark drifted in and out of the apartment like a tide I no longer tracked, his presence a shadow, his absences a relief. I didn't confront him, didn't need to. Whatever he was chasing out there, it wasn't mine to fix anymore. My world had tilted, its center shifting toward the garage, toward Jace. We hadn't crossed that line again, not yet, but every glance, every brush of his hand as he handed me a wrench or a coffee carried the weight of what we'd already shared. It was a slow burn, deliberate, and I savored it. I found myself at the garage more often, excuses thin but unspoken, a loose bolt I didn't trust, a question about the engine, anything to linger in that space where the air smelled of grease and possibility. Jace never called me on it, just grinned that easy grin and let me stay. We'd work side by side, him under the hood, me passing tools or watching the way his hands moved, steady and sure. The other mechanics barely noticed, their chatter a backdrop to our quiet orbit. Ethan showed up sometimes, clueless as ever, tossing banter at Jace while I leaned against a workbench, hiding a smile. "You're here a lot lately," Ethan said once, eyebrows up. "Car's fine now, right?" I shrugged. Just like the vibe. One afternoon, the garage was slow, the lot empty save for a beat-up pickup in the corner. Jace was tinkering with it, his shirt streaked with oil when I arrived. He glanced up, wiping his brow, and nodded me over. "Perfect timing. Need an extra set of hands." I slid in beside him, the heat of the engine warming the air between us. Our fingers brushed as I held a clamp in place, and he didn't pull away. Neither did I. "You're good at this," he said, voice low, like it was more than the task he meant. "Getting there," I replied, meeting his eyes. The moment stretched, heavy and unspoken, until he cleared his throat and stepped back. "Almost done here." We finished late, the sky bruising purple outside. He locked up, the clang of the gate sharp in the quiet, and turned to me. "Diner again?" It was becoming our ritual. Coffee, late-night plates of fries, a booth that felt like ours. I nodded and we walked the block, shoulders close but not touching. Inside, the fluorescent hum wrapped around us, the waitress tossing us a knowing smile as she poured. We talked. About nothing, about everything. His childhood summers fixing bikes, my years lost to Mark's silence. "You deserve more than that," he said once, abrupt and serious, his fork pausing mid-air. I held his gaze. "I'm starting to think so too." The walk back was slower, the night crisp and alive. At my car, he stopped, hands in his pockets again, his breath fogging faintly in the cool air. "Lara," he started, then paused like he was weighing something heavy. "Yeah?" I prompted, stepping closer. He looked at me, eyes dark and steady. Us, it's not nothing to me." My heart thudded, loud enough I swore he'd hear it. "It's not nothing to me either," I said, soft but firm. He nodded, a small smile breaking through, and for a moment, I thought he'd kiss me. But he didn't, just held my gaze, letting the words settle. Back home, Mark was there, slumped on the couch with a beer, the TV droning. "Where you been?" he mumbled, not really looking. "Out," I said, short and clipped, heading for the bedroom. He didn't push, didn't care enough to. I closed the door, leaning against it, Jace's words replaying in my head. Not nothing. It was more than that. It was everything shifting, a life I'd stopped dreaming of cracking open. Sleep came slow, my mind restless with him, with what was building. The next day, I was back at the garage. No excuse this time, just a need I couldn't name. Jace was alone when I got there, the others off on a break. He looked up from a stack of invoices, surprise flickering across his face before it softened. "Hey, you?" "Hey," I said, stepping inside. "Thought I'd check in." He set the papers down, leaning against the desk, his eyes tracing me. "Good timing again. I was just thinking about you." My breath caught, but I smiled. "Yeah? What about?" He crossed his arms, a grin tugging at his mouth. "How you keep showing up. How I don't mind it." The air shifted, warmer, closer, and I felt it, the edge we were teetering on, ready to fall. We didn't work on anything that day, just sat in the cluttered office, talking until the light faded. When he walked me out, his hand brushed my back, lingering a beat too long. "Tomorrow?" he asked, voice low. "Tomorrow," I agreed, my skin humming where he'd touched. Driving home, the city blurred past, but all I saw was him, his grin, his steadiness, the promise of more. Mark was asleep when I got in. Ethan's door shut tight. I didn't care. I was already somewhere else, chasing a future I could finally see. The next few days blurred into a rhythm I hadn't known I'd been craving. The garage became my refuge, Jace my anchor, and the apartment just a place I slept. When I slept at all. Mark's comings and goings faded to static, his voice a dull hum I tuned out. He'd stopped asking where I was, stopped pretending to care, and I let him drift. A ghost I'd once clung to now slipping through my fingers. Ethan noticed my absence more, his brows knitting one morning as he grabbed his keys. "You're never here anymore," he said, half curious, half annoyed. "Been busy," I replied, vague and unbothered. He didn't press, just left for the garage, oblivious to the pull drawing me there too. That afternoon I found Jace alone again, the shop quiet under a gray sky. He was bent over an engine, sleeves shoved up, his focus sharp until he saw me. "Hey," he said, straightening, a smile breaking through the grease on his face. "Hey," I echoed, stepping closer, the familiar hum between us sparking alive. "Slow day?" He nodded, wiping his hands. "Just this stubborn thing. You here to help?" I laughed, light and easy. "Maybe. Or maybe I just wanted to see you." His eyes softened, a flicker of something deeper passing through them. "Good reason," he said, voice low, and the air tightened, pulling us in. We didn't work long. The engine could wait, he said, and we ended up in the office again, a tangle of chairs and papers, coffee cups between us. The conversation flowed, plans, dreams, The kind of talk that builds something real. I've been stuck too long, I admitted, staring into my mug. With Mark, with everything, I forgot what moving forward felt like. Jace leaned closer, his hand resting near mine. "You're moving now," he said, quiet but sure. "I see it." My chest warmed, his words a mirror to the shift I felt, the woman I was becoming. The sky darkened outside, rain tapping the roof, and we stayed, the world shrinking to this cluttered room. His knee pressed against mine under the desk, deliberate this time, and I didn't move away. "Lara," he said, his voice rougher now. "I meant it. This isn't nothing." I looked at him, his face close, his eyes steady. "I know," I whispered, and then he kissed me, not tentative like before, but certain, claiming. My hands found his shoulders, his neck pulling him in, the rain a soft roar around us. It was different this time, sober, intentional, a promise sealed in the quiet. When we pulled apart, breathless, he rested his forehead against mine. "What now?" he asked, a grin tugging at his lips. I smiled, my heart steady. "Now we figure it out, together." He nodded, his hand sliding into mine, fingers lacing tight. We left the garage as the rain eased, walking to the diner, soaked but laughing. Over coffee, we mapped it. Small steps, real ones. I'd leave Mark, not for Jace, but for me. He'd be there, not pushing, just waiting. It wouldn't be easy, but it felt right. Back home that night, Mark was awake, slumped on the couch, a beer in hand. "Where you been?" he asked, sharper than usual. I met his gaze, unflinching. "Does it matter?" He frowned, caught off guard, but I didn't wait for more. I grabbed a bag from the closet, stuffing it with clothes, essentials, enough to start. "What's this?" he demanded, standing now. "I'm done," I said, calm and final. "Been done a long time, you know it." He stared, mouth open, but no words came. I walked out, the door clicking shut behind me, a weight lifting with every step. I drove to a motel, the neon sign buzzing as I checked in. Alone in the dim room, I texted Jace. "Left, staying here tonight." His reply was instant. "You okay?" "Yeah," I typed back. "Better than okay." Sleep came fast, dreamless, the first real rest I'd had in months. Morning broke bright, and I met Jace at the garage, his truck already there. He pulled me into a hug, solid and warm, and I sank into it. "Hey," he said, pulling back to look at me. "Hey," I replied, smiling. "What's next?" He grinned, wide and real. "Anything you want." We spent the day together, no rush, no plan, just driving, talking, letting the future unfold. By night, I had a lease on a small place, a start. Jace helped me move in, his laughter filling the bare rooms as we unpacked. Mark faded to a memory, Ethan a call I'd make later. This was mine now, ours, and it was enough. The first night in my new bed, Jace beside me, I whispered, "This is it, isn't it?" He squeezed my hand, his voice soft in the dark. "Yeah, this is it." And as sleep took me, I knew this wasn't just a beginning, it was everything I'd been waiting for.